Okay, so I'd like to now introduce our first featured reader for today.
Steve Dieffenbacher.
I first met Steve and also Amy in 2012 at the Northwest Poets Concord in Newport, Oregon, at the Hallmark Inn. They were part of a fun group of Ashland poets who came up and attended the conference, and we all read poetry, attended workshops, ate great food, and partied for the weekend. Many of us came back for several years to do it all over again, and I've heard Steve as a featured reader before, having videotaped his reading at Grassroots Books in Corvallis, Oregon in 2012, which you can view on my YouTube channel, so I know you're in for a wonderful treat today. I ask all my featured readers to provide me with a short bio, and this is what Steve sent me. Steve Dieffenbacher. His full-length book of poems, The Sky is a Bird of Sorrow, was published by Wordcraft of Oregon in 2012. The collection won a Forward Reviews 2013 Bronze Award for Poetry. A poem in the book, Night Singer, Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, was named a 2013 Spur Award Poetry finalist by the Western Writers of America, and he won the Cloudbank Magazine Poetry Prize in 2010. He also has 3 chapbooks, At the Boundary, 2001, Universe of the Unsaid, 2010, and Intimations, 2018, and has been published widely in regional anthologies and magazines. He lives in Medford, Oregon. So please, with no further ado, please welcome
Steve Dieffenbacher.
There, that's perfect. That's perfect, yeah. Well, I'm glad to be back in Eugene again. I haven't been here for quite a while. I'm trying to remember the last time that I did a reading here. It was right after the full-size book came out in 2018, and it was at Tsunami Books with Tony Hanner. Actually, we shared the time. So it's been a while. But it was a beautiful drive up here today, although I was really surprised how much snow you have still on the ground. All ours has melted now down in the valley, in the Rogue Valley. I have to tell one story about, it's not really a story, but it's just a sense of how good I thought Stephen was at doing things like this. He and I were at one of the Concords. Well, I think we were there twice together. I met him there, and I remember one year, I think it was the second time that we were both there, they were having real problems with the sound system, the mic there, and Stephen stepped right up and he fixed that in such a short amount of time. I mean, it comes from, I'm sure, from his background with the film industry down in Southern California, and just his ability to do that was a surprise to people. And from then on, he was their sound specialist. So I think I was there maybe a third time, because I know the next year there was no question about who was going to handle the sound. And I have been following what he's been doing up here, and he's a great credit to your poetry community. I mean, someone who can organize events like this, and I know he's done some just to recognize the poetry that's up here in Eugene, apart from the Barnes Noble series. So I almost wish we had somebody that was that out there and doing these public events as he is. Yeah, applause for Stephen. And I do thank Barnes Noble for providing a space for this reading. It's sometimes hard to get venues nowadays, and I'm glad that they're doing that. So I'm going to mention the 2 books that I have here are the one that he mentioned, the full-size book that was published in 2012, and then this Intimations book was published in October. And I thought that was enough. There's a couple other chapbooks, but they're older. Well, I had to start my reading today with a poem about spring, or perhaps the lack of it, or the delay of it. This is actually not a new poem, but it seemed very appropriate to what's happening this year. And I don't regret the moisture. We really need the moisture. So, and I actually like a little bit of snow, so it hasn't bothered me much. But if you're not used to it, I know it seems really aberrant to have snow this late well, into March actually. Violent spring, Siskiyou foothills. All night trees fall, their limbs cracking down slope into nests of violet blooms. Nature's mask of hope broken by the gods of storm. This is the deception of renewal. Spring's arched branches cast across birdless pastures, mud brighter than cinnabar lashed by unceasing wind. Across the valley, hills breathe emergence, over fields empty of deer. Beside the path, drums echo in a manzanita's shattered branches, its roots torn from earth in a cradle of bucking stillness. All winter I hoped for spring, and it has not come. Lilies lean belled and freighted, wild mustard holds its wrinkled leaves close. Aged oaks bend dark and leafless in a world ripe with omen. I turned 70 in December, and it was almost a shock to me. I always thought I wouldn't make it this far because well, there's several reasons, but the main one is my father died at age 44 of a heart attack. And every year after I turned 44, I was grateful to get that far. I always wondered what would happen, but it was somehow after that year passed, then it started to become less and less of a worry. But the years do creep up on you. And two of the things that always happen as we get older are, one, we start to lose people if we haven't already. But the positive that comes out of it is that we often reconnect with old friends. So I'm going to read one about that latter aspect of aging first, and then one about loss. At Santa Cruz, for Kathy. We hardly touched, a hug here, a brush across your face there, in my rambler at dusk above the sea. Now we talk easily, phones warm in our hands, as she says, remember that somber cafe near the dorm where you tried to convince me that God existed? I couldn't buy it. There was Biafra, all those starving children. One day in her room, I tried to kiss her, stroking her forehead. It's like you're petting a cat, she said, nervous, drawing away. But you did kiss me later, she says, laughing now, and I liked it. I recall no electricity, just an aching awkwardness and shafts of sunlight over the ocean. Today we talk of children and what we've read. How beautiful that California courtyard was. How little we need in what's left of these burning days. You're so appreciative. I haven't had this people clapping after individual poems, but it's very nice. But you don't have to do it after every one. This is the title poem for my new chapbook, Intimations. There's the friend at 90 I talked to a year ago, saying again that nothing matters. A voice at the end of the line, as clear as it was in his restaurant decades earlier, where he worked aproned and smiling. He'd called and wanted to have lunch, but I made no promises, and now he's gone. All my dead walk with me in the dream I made of my father at the table, talking and nodding, always present, living or dead, when I sleep or look out a window where starlings gorge on autumn fruit. All things resonate. The mantel clock marks my minutes. The light goes out as if I'm already gone too. While at night the cats are jumping, thuds of feet and long dead claws moving through us, my wife says, smiling sadly, as dusk fills our gaps and bears down on us to feed. Missing a poem here. Let me see if I can find it. Well, here's an alternative poem. That's always nice when you have an extra one. I think the other one was one I preferred more, though. I haven't written much, or I haven't, actually that's how I wanted to start. I haven't written much about my journalism career, which is where I spend most of my time in my writing. I had written poetry in college. I was an English major, and even in the decades after that, but it wasn't really until I was in my 40s, mid-40s, that I started to really pursue poetry actively. And I think the reason that I ended up not pursuing a poetry MFA in college is I just didn't think that I could make a living at poetry, and I thought I want to write, so I went into journalism. But one of the things that I am starting to do now is to write about some of my early years in journalism, and especially in Eastern Oregon. I lived in La Grande 10 years, and one of the things that really struck me about those years is something that was missing now a lot in our society, and that is the civility that I experienced there. I mean, if you go over there now, there may be Trump signs up and so on, but the people there, they did not talk politics. It wasn't something that you talked about, and they were gracious, they were kind, and I ended up working the farm beat. I knew nothing about farming. I hadn't grown up on a farm, but they were very courteous about answering all my questions, and I think they appreciated just my curiosity about something I didn't know. So this is a poem about a farmer there. Orchardist of the Year, Union County. From a distance the house reached out, white painted with blue trim, the cherry trees in neat rows along gentle hills curving behind. The earth between each stand shorn of weeds, his tractor clean beside the shed where he stood waiting. After chatting about the weather and last year's crop, we rode up a dirt track above the valley. The tree leaves green, blossoms humming with bees, and we paused to look. Later there was a handshake, a smile, and I went away, seeing the trees swelling into fruit before summer's turn, the slow ripening into hands that would bring down his bounty into wooden boxes, the cherries red in the sun before trucks drove off to market, and he, gloves on, turned back, winter's cover crop already on his mind. After quite a few years in journalism, I ended up on the desk working as an editor, which wasn't as interesting, but it was also an experience that I'm grateful for. In most journalism jobs, you work really long hours and odd hours, and I was working late at night because most newspapers are morning newspapers now. This is a poem about coming home after one of those shifts. Coming home, 3 a.m. The garage door rises behind the smell of dew. A pause before smoke from a chimney fogs the mind's slow cello to echoes of barking dogs. Now the raven-headed dark truly arrives, the old metamorphosis of gloved velvet over Grendel arms that invade the mead halls to tear at sleeping flesh. Its lidless eye, blind from staring, tries to see our gleaming days, weighing every stone as if it were light, just to imagine what living is. The groan of toads rises from backwaters, strange even to the final hour moon, yellowing the air like harbor lights, making every lie possible. There's so many issues to be concerned about nowadays, it's hard to know which ones to focus on, and I went through quite a period of wrestling with what I wanted to do when I retired from journalism. And the two that I particularly feel very passionate about, because there's a personal connection, are climate change and the way immigrants are treated now coming from the South, and also how our disenfranchised, our down and outs in this country are treated, the poor, and many of them face the loss of some of the social programs that they really need to survive. This first one is about climate change in a different way, I hope. Enduring. She could see the day coming when the seas would rise, the lights go out, the first seeping cold reach under the door, and she was prepared for it, gathering her children by the fire in a rhythm as old as speech, emptying from the heart. There would be a time to find what they needed for living, but that was for tomorrow. This was the moment for the solace of words rising into the arc of a fire. It didn't matter what came had come from us. Here was the press of her daughters on her arms beside the embers, voices that would emerge when asked if there was time and they could remember who they had been. I had to make all the characters in that poem female. I have two daughters, so particularly hit me when I thought about what they might be facing. This is the poem about immigrants. Now, the immigrant in this poem is from Mexico. I spent most of my time in Central America up to the age of 13, which are actually most of the ones in the caravans now are from Central America, not Mexico. Table Rock Pilgrimage. She ascends in clear light, this Maria, the color of dolor, who came up from the border through Choya, past the slow helicopter with infrared eyes. Here her voice is a contralto, willing the limits of her poor son's hand up stony slopes of oaks and leaves she sings to, beating a path of new being. She feels her power, plucks the light to inclination she'd never had when gringos went mad in the Red Room in Juarez. Te quiero, she'd said, lying in the flow of their vacant sighs, throbbing across the cloth until the lost hour passed. Past as filtered light in hollows across her face, while on her table the brown virgin, Guadalupe, spoke Nahuatl again on Tepeyac. Words that drove her across the line into this new world, clean as a hospital, where she scrubs the infirmary. On knees, she's finally told to stand. Fleeing the border, she formed the boy in a barn near Indio, with a stranger bartering a biscuit. Shaped him out of her own dark earth and gave him the run of her breasts. Now he grips a full-grown song of will, as strong as her own. Bone-breaker cries that lead them up the hill like hawks, to gaze down scattered talus at the golden river, here where the sky glows like no sky in Mexico, and the mountains welcome the boy to set a table for their feast. One place I find a lot of solace and consolation these days is the desert, and particularly the Southwest desert, because the landscape down there is so expansive. Yeah, I feel diminished in that landscape, but I also feel expansive in that landscape, which seems like a paradox, but it's really true. I feel like I'm finally placed in my true relationship to the cosmos, to the universe there. And knowing that somehow frees me from a lot of ordinary concerns. These two poems are about a retreat that a friend of mine, Jonah Bornstein, and I, a fellow poet, took to New Mexico, and we did go to Chaco Canyon where there's so many ruins of the ancient Puebloan people. Pueblo de Arroyo, Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, for Jonah. We did not go into this last city, the walls and wildflower-lined kivas open to wind, a line we couldn't cross as close as we were. All through the valley, forms lay sleeping, beings bound to abandoned spirals, grass that waved toward the hills. We talked about what we had seen, understood it as a presence, the crumbling cities, walls with corner openings facing the sun. And there the desert left us, its wheels aligned to clotted stars, and the irregular beat of rain and wind, too faint and sacred to navigate. The last ridge above Jemez Springs, New Mexico. We saw then that all the paths led to the same place, whose name no one remembered, but said existed. You can walk anywhere and there is a way, they told us. Sometimes all we followed were glints of bone or boot prints near junipers in fallen wood, until all the plants were new to us above the wash. We didn't ascend the wall of cast-down boulders, but went around, not speaking to each other, yet paired. We came to a meadow mounded with grass, and knew it no longer mattered who or what we were, looking to the roll of clouds over the cliff, and in them our disappearance to a pathless air. How am I doing for time, Stephen?
Let's see.
Just have
What do you got?
one or two more.
Okay, that should be fine.
So the desert opens me up in a certain way, and then also I feel I have a real interest in prehistory, and I guess because of the long stretch of time that we have existed on this planet, I like to try occasionally, and I do this more in the Oregon desert, to go out and try to just sit out there and imagine myself 15 or 20,000 years ago in Oregon, and what it would be like to have existed then, and with a different way of engaging with the world. The Hunter at Heart Mountain, Oregon. This is Heart Mountain National Antelope Refuge. Birds cried under the rim as he stood in that reach of twilight sky, stretching to blue mountains. Stalking the tall grass, atlatl in hand, he gazed at dying lakes, the receding woods turning to tans and sunset yellow, a steady dusk. At the lake I scrabble through sage, seeking him in lichen, scraped shapes of animals where the unyielding stone cuts through dry branches above the graying shore. Try to become him, moving toward rims beside the shallow water. There his handiwork climbs still, a painted turtle, thin-legged and pale, marking a mottled way from earth to sky. I see him and his kinsman, silent as he paints, backs hooded under rock as I walk away, grateful for anything that can still be hidden. I'm also interested in astronomy, and this poem came out of reading a little story in a Lauren Isley book called The Firmament of Time, and he recounted this anecdote about a scientist who knew so much about the particles of matter he was terrified when he found out there was more space in the universe than there was solid matter. And so he started wearing these very long, flat shoes so to prevent himself from falling through the vacuum of space. So I took that idea and I came up with this poem. He saw the porous truth of himself at last, the pale hands of night reaching beyond the floor. As he walked heavily through gleaming rooms he filled with oil lanterns and tapered glass, candles consuming themselves in flame to hold back the darkness. He felt their naked and ghostly reality in him, those black gaps like fingers in melting glass, atoms transfigured by doubt coiling out until everything he knew was riddled with openings. He wanted to see this truth as freedom, his life released at last from its heavy port, his body a bright ribbon of dust in a nostrum of the all. But then his mind began to float too, each thought glinting away as he realized the shoes could never hold, that every pull of the void drew from them as well, every nucleus a minute spinning bird, neutrons, faint insects flowing in a slow, silent wave from him and from the cloak he wore, even in sleep, to keep his body in. And then his body was gone, his consciousness a mere wisp of cloud, believing it had lived sometime, somewhere in a husk of bone and heart, even as it swiveled toward the faraway gulfs, the wayward arc of vanishing galaxies, senseless and unburdened in their wild mystery of becoming. So maybe I'll stop there. I think that's all I'm going to do.
Steve Dieffenbacher.
Let's give Steve another hand. Thank you so much. You know, this is the problem with, limiting of featured readers to 20, even 25 minutes, is that, like Steve, I could listen to Steve read all day long. His stuff is great. And I feel the same way about Amy, and you're going to find that out right now. So, if we had 3-4 hours, we could just keep on going, it'd be great.